What we have today is either an extremely charming short story that is going to cause you nostalgia or one of the darkest short stories you're ever likely to read. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for the third in I think it's like a 44-part read-along series as we journey sort of not chapter by chapter, not story by story, but feature by feature, if you will, through Let Me Tell You by Shirley Jackson. Today's short story is Arabian Nights. We will have a So What Happened recap of the short story, a literary criticism section, and a writer's corner section. So, what happened? Alice's parents and Mr. and Mrs. Carrington decide to take her out for her birthday, and the four adults get around to asking her where she wants to go now that she's a young lady of 12 years old. She answers that she wants to go to Arabian Nights, and everyone stares at her for naming the nightclub. After all, it is a nightclub and not, I don't know, like a Chuck E. Cheese. So it's in her head that if they go there, she can wear her new bracelet and nail polish that she got for her birthday. And that's just what happens. While they're there, things are going all right. Alice likes the dance shows, and then Clark Gable shows up and the mood changes. The adults start to become self conscious and want to meet him, and they start also, namely, Alice's father starts questioning life decisions, and Alice's father gets the bright idea to send Alice over to Clark Gable for an autograph, maybe even ask him over for a drink. Alice tries to get out of it, but her mother then tries to talk her into it. She denies again. Then her mother lays it on, and so does her father, and Mrs. Carrington, and Mr. Carrington. But before they know it, Clark Gable is leaving. And then Alice is ready to go too. So, let's get into the literary criticism here. And the first thing I want to bring up is that names are sometimes meaningless, but they're never on accident, right? Alice, the name Alice, means noble or exalted. So that is to be taken into account when you are talking about a short story where the I mean, what would you call that? A preteen, right? The preteen is trying to wear the masks of adulthood and thinks that part of that is going to a nightclub and wearing her fancy new getup. So on page 23 and 24 of this collection, we get this. When everyone so here, okay. We have Alice, for some reason, choosing to be an adult, choosing to try to put on the face of an adult. Now, 12 years old, if I'm correct, that's like sixth grade, right? So you're talking right around those middle school years, and that's when you're going through all sorts of changes. So you have a person who is struggling towards adulthood, struggling towards individuality, struggling towards trying to transcend the area of life in which she finds herself as a child, going to school every day. And that idea is going to come back prevalently at the end. Right now, she wants to go to a nightclub to be an adult instead of going to school and being a child. School during the morning, nightclub during the evening, school with work, nightclub with play. All of these things are her reaching out towards what she thinks the idea of being an adult is. When everyone had a drink, Mr. Carrington had ordered a glass of sherry for Alice. She picked it up and took a sip from it, just like everyone else. Then she watched how her mother toyed with the stem of her glass and did the same thing. Toying with the stem of the glass is a phallic symbol. Her mother was doing it, so she did it. Seen through the glass, her fingers were long and thin. You could go with the Freudian route here, where that also is a phallic symbol, or you can look at this from the standpoint of looking at it through the glass. The glass is a symbol of adulthood. Looking at her fingers through the glass, they are long and thin. As you become an adult, you go from squat and thick to the sort of ideal is long and thin, right? You go from being squat, thick, sort of compact, and you thin out as you grow. When the floor show started, Alice had just begun her soup. Her father and Mr. Carrington ate right on through in the almost darkness, and so did she. Now she's mimicking the males in the group. It's canned tomato soup, like at home, she thought with surprise. Now you have this veil of the fancy nightclub. Oh, but it's Campbell's soup. I'm paying $40 for this bowl, and it's Campbell's soup. They were sitting very close to the stage. Everyone had taken care that Alice should sit where she could see everything. The comedians embarrassed her because it was necessary for her to pretend not to understand them when she saw her mother glance at her and tighten her lips to keep from smiling. So you have comedians telling adult jokes. Alice understands them, but has to pretend that she doesn't because her mother is watching her. Her father and Mr. Carrington were watching her too, and she was proud when she realized she was acting exactly like everyone else. Here we have again Alice trying on the face of an adult. The dancers delighted her. One of them came down to the edge of the stage with a bowl full of gardenias to throw at the audience, and he saw Alice and tossed her one. Gardenias symbolize purity and innocence. Now, here's okay, we're going to get into it now. Gardenias symbolize purity and innocence. We have here Alice trying on the face of adulthood. Gardenias also were once used to symbolize a secret love. You would leave I believe it was a white gardenia for the person on whom you had a crush. Okay, so not that the dancer has a crush on Alice, but we have the symbol of secret love present. Now that we think about it, where did Alice get that glass that she was playing with, that she was pretending to be an adult by drinking sherry? Let's go back. When everyone had a drink, Mr. Carrington had ordered a glass of sherry for Alice. Mr. Carrington has ordered this glass. Through that, so there's the stem. Not going to touch on that again. No pun intended. And there's also the symbol of seeing adult fingers through the glass of sherry. Now we have the idea of a secret love thrown into the mix. And then on this same page, we should have thought to get her some flowers, Mr. Carrington said as he pinned the gardenia onto Alice's shoulder. The symbol of the secret love. Later, on this same page, cigarette, Mr. Carrington said to Alice very solemnly. Cigarettes, the symbol with sexuality, that's age old, that's as old as cigarettes themselves, but also the idea that here we have Mr. Carrington tempting Alice towards the adult more and more. Cigarette, Mr. Carrington said to Alice very solemnly. Alice looked at her mother, and her mother shook her head. I suppose I can't have everything, Alice thought. No, thank you, she said to Mr. Carrington. I don't smoke. And Mr. Carrington, smiling, put the cigarette case away. Then we have later, look, she said excitedly, isn't that Clark Gable coming with that party over there? She gestured for Mrs. Carrington to look, about 3 tables in back of Alice. I'm certain it is. Mr. Carrington and Alice's father were listening by this time. Mrs. Carrington gave one quick glance to the side. It certainly does look like him, she said. Alice's father and Mr. Carrington both looked. Sure, it's him, Mr. Carrington said. Major Gable, Alice's father said, volunteered to be top gunner during the war. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, whispered Mrs. Carrington to Alice's mother. Alice then turned around because everyone else at the table had. People all over the room were looking too. And she felt oddly conspicuous because she was so close to Mr. Gable and at the table where everyone was turning to look. You have an object of desire walking into the room, Clark Gable. Though Alice doesn't really seem to understand, she is following along with this object of desire and the fantasy of importance until it is laid upon her to go and advance on Clark Gable. It seems that Alice does not want anything to do with Clark Gable, but she does want something to do with someone. Also, in that bit there, or Alice didn't turn around. She is in that moment mimicking Mrs. Carrington. So she is sort of confused to what the big hubbub is with that object of desire. When Mrs. Carrington says, frankly, I don't care, Alice doesn't turn around either. Then we have this on 27 into 28. The lights began to dim for the second time of the floor show. Alice put her hand on Mr. Carrington's arm. Mr. Carrington, she said, I've got a lot of algebra homework to do for tomorrow. So as soon as we finish dinner, can we go home? Mr. Carrington was moving his chair to see the floor show, but he stopped for a minute and looked at her. Alice put her hands under the table and began to work the fastening charm of the bracelet. I've got all my French to do, too, she said. Now, it is rough to read that paragraph, believing or reading into the story that either, so there's one of two things going on here. Either Mr. Carrington is sort of that childhood crush for Alice. She is yearning towards adulthood and has found an adult on whom she figures a crush. That's why she's trying to be an adult. She's trying to look like an adult. She's wearing all of the fingernail polish, all of the jewelry of the adult. And when she decides the world of the adults is not for her, she starts to unfasten her bracelet. She starts to, she unfastens her bracelet and starts thinking about her homework. She reverts from the world of the adult to the world of the child. But there is something starkly disturbing about this paragraph. The lights began to dim for a half second of the floor show. Alice put her hand on Mr. Carrington's arm. "Mr. Carrington," she said, "I've got a lot of algebra homework to do for tomorrow. So as soon as we finish dinner, could we go home?" Why is she talking to Mr. Carrington? Why is it Mr. Carrington that she is asking to go home? Why is she touching Mr. Carrington's arm? This could be innocent. It is real weird to sit at a table with your father, look at a different man, and say, "Can't we go home?" Is this Alice saying, "I don't want this"? Or, so definitely there's the "I don't want," right? She's starting to take her bracelet off. That's the adult thing. She's asking to leave the nightclub. That's the adult place. She's saying, "I have school in the morning." That's the childhood place. She's saying, "I have to do my homework." That's the childhood thing. So she's certainly saying, "I don't want this." Is it possible in this short story that what she's saying is, "I don't want this anymore"? Is that relationship between Mr. Carrington and Alice already established? Is that what we're being shown without being told in this short story? We also have Mr. Carrington is described as big and cheerful and red-faced. So we are left to assume he's an alcoholic. I think we're left to assume that he's an alcoholic. So we are left to assume that he has problems with something. He has issues. So Alice was very fond of both of them at the beginning of the story about the Carringtons. So it's possible that what we have here is the story of a girl who is testing what it means to be a woman. The way that all girls test what it means to be a woman, the way that all boys test what it means to be a man. The middle school years, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, probably none of us remember them too fondly just because of how awkward everything was. So, while and whereas, if that is what this story is, it's not, maybe not nostalgic, but certainly it's charming, right? You remember this phase of your life where you were figuring out what adulthood meant. Now, you couldn't approach it. You had no idea how to act on it. But for the first time in your life, you were starting to recognize patterns of what adult was, what grown up did, what your parents, not even necessarily your parents, what adults were able to do. They didn't have homework. They didn't have to take home school books. You did. They didn't. Wouldn't it be great to never have homework again? You have these naive ideas of what it means to be an adult. You don't realize that, yeah, you don't have homework when you're an adult, but everything else sucks. So there's that. But it's also possible that what this story is much darker than that. And that Alice, who is just 12 years old, does not just have a crush on Mr. Carrington, but has an inappropriate relationship, a dastardly relationship, a disgusting relationship, um, a relationship of victimization, right, with Mr. Carrington. So that final paragraph there, one thing that's interesting about it as well, if I'm reading too much into this, that last paragraph is still interesting for this reason. I'm going to read it one more time. The lights began to dim for the second half of the floor show. Alice put her hand on Mr. Carrington's arm. "Mr. Carrington," she said, "I've got a lot of algebra to do for tomorrow. So as soon as we finish dinner, could we go home?" Mr. Carrington was moving his chair to see the floor show, but he stopped for a minute and looked at her. Alice put her hands under the table and began to work the fastening of the charm bracelet. "I've got all my French to do, too," she said. It's, okay, so the point I was going to make is that in this story where Alice has the excuse to make everything about her, it's her birthday, where do you want to go, all this stuff, it turns out that at the end of the day, no one cares. Right? No one cares. But it just hit me that there could be a different reason to be taking that bracelet off. That bracelet is a noisemaker. You understand what I'm saying? Mr. Carrington stops to look at her after she has made contact with him, and then she puts her hands under the table to take the bracelet off. That bracelet makes noise. So I think that you understand what I'm talking about there. This could be the darkest short story you have ever read. Now, moving on to the writer's corner portion of this video. On page 22 and 23, this is something that crushes me every time. "I want to go to the Arabian Nights," Alice said quickly. Everyone looked at her and blushed. "What on earth?" her father said. He turned Alice's face around. "Why do you want to go there?" Mr. Carrington was trying very hard not to laugh. "I don't blame her," he said. "I'd like to go there myself. Always did want to." Alice held her breath. The Arabian Nights was a very big, very noisy, very famous nightclub. If she went there for dinner, she could wear her new bracelet and her nail polish. Maybe this is just a me thing, so you'll have to let me know. Moments in literature where someone is outed for how they think about themselves, or someone is trying very hard to improve themselves, and we see they're not making any progress, but they don't. Flowers for Algernon. The very beginning of that book, he is trying very hard, attending classes, going to work. Charlie is trying to make his life better. And he's not going to get anywhere. We see that. He has no idea. Crushes me. As good as it gets. There's a moment where the main woman is, I can't remember her name, is wearing a house dress or a summer dress, I think maybe it is. And Jack Nicholson's character calls it a cheap summer dress, something like that. And it was her favorite dress. It was the dress she liked. That was the dress she thought she looked good in, right? Those moments crush me every time. Here, we have this protagonist, Alice. wanting to be an adult. We know very clearly she's not an adult. We know very clearly that bracelet and that nail polish, those don't matter. Sneak into a nightclub if you want. You are a preteen, right? You're a child. We know that. She does not. So there's all the time in literature you find moments of people putting masks on, working themselves up to do something. But the moments that get me very heavily are the moments where characters are trying just to get to base level. Like Alice here, she's not trying to be Superwoman. She wants to be a person. She wants to be an adult. Charlie, in Flowers for Algernon, he wasn't working so hard in order to run for president. He wanted the guys at work not to pick on him so much. He thought if he could get this stuff done, maybe he'd be all right. You know, Lenny of Mice and Men, he just wants to be able to stop someplace. I feel like I'm always moving with you. We're always moving around. Right? He just wants a home. Those are the things that crush me. Maybe that's not writing advice. Maybe that's not writer's corner worthy. But I think that if you can work moments like that into your story, they do have weight. That is all I have for this short story discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more literature in the future. There's poetry every Mondays, and I hope to have you back for the next one.